Welcome to Bistory Media. As the predominantly northern Nigerian army marched in, Colonel Hassan Katsina mocked at the Biafran army of pen pushers and predicted a quick victory. Because of their superior speed, ingenuity, and resourcefulness, the Biafrans believed that if they could hold out for a few months, the Nigerians would recognize the folly of the war and return home or negotiate. Neither of these turned out to be correct. Fighting started on July 6, 1967, with an artillery bombardment against Ogoja, a town near the northern region's border in Biafra's northeast corner. In what Colonel Ojukwu recognized as a diversionary attack, two federal battalions faced the Biafrans. The real attack took place further west, near Nsukka, an affluent market town that had recently been blessed with the University of Nsukka, which had been renamed University of Biafra. On July 8th, the remaining 6 battalions of the Nigerian army camped in the main Aziks near Nsukka marched in. They pushed roughly 4 miles before becoming stranded. The Biafrans fought back tenaciously despite having only about 3,000 men in arms in that sector compared to the Nigerians with about 6,000 men and a handful of light arms and ammunition. The Nigerians were able to seize and destroy the town of Nsukka as well as the university, but they were unable to go any further. The towns of Yanya and Gakim in Ogoja province were captured and brought into range of the artillery. The Biafrans would now form a defensive line along a river to the south of the towns. The fightings would halt here and the situation appeared to be, or perhaps remained, calm. After 2 weeks of immobility of the Biafran forces, the federal government would start broadcasting that several Biafran towns have been captured. To those in Enugu, which encompassed the whole population, including expatriates, it appeared that someone in Lagos was randomly poking pins in a map. After 3 weeks, the Nigerians ran into problem when 2 of their battalions were trapped and broken up to the east of Nsukka, between the major road and the railway line, after being cut off from the rest. To salvage this situation, 2 more crashed battalions, made up of training staff and trainees, would be deployed into the Nsukka Aziks by the Nigerians. In the air, fighting was confined to the exploit of a lone Biafran B-26 American-built Second World War bomber piloted by a Pole named Kamikaze Brown, and to 6 French-built Aleut helicopters piloted by Biafrans from which to rain hand grenades and homemade bombs on the Nigerians. On July 25, the Nigerians staged an unexpected seaborne attack on the island of Bonny, south of Port Harcourt. This was a spectacular coup in an increasingly newsless war. Bonny was the oil loading terminal for the Shell BP pipeline from Port Harcourt and a major source of revenue. However, it was worthless militarily, because after being warned, the Biafrans relentlessly patrolled the waters north of Bonny, and other subsequent Nigerian attempts to launch more waterborne attacks northwards on the mainland around Port Harcourt were repelled. On August 9, the Biafrans struck in earnest with a coup that shook observers both in Biafra and Lagos. Starting at dawn, a mobile brigade of 3,000 men they had carefully prepared in secret swept across the Onitsha Bridge into the Midwest. In 10 hours of daylight, the region had fallen, and the towns of Warri, Sapele, Oil Center at Ughelli, Agbo, Uromi, Ubiaja, and Benin City were occupied by Biafran forces. Of the small army of the Midwest, nothing was heard. The capture of the Midwest changed the balance of the war and put the whole of Nigeria's oil resources under Biafran control. At this time, Biafra had taken about 20,000 square miles of Nigeria's territory, but loses around 500 square miles of her own land in 3 minor sections along the periphery. More importantly, the entire Nigerian infantry force was thousands of kilometers away on the other side, with the Niger River separating them from the route leading back to the capital in Lagos. They were unable to act. The road to Lagos was open and undefended for the Biafrans. Colonel Ojukwu then went to great lengths to appease the Midwest non-Igbo population and assure them that it meant no harm to them. For about a week, delegation of tribal chiefs, bankers, traders, chambers of commerce representatives, army personnel, and church dignitaries came to Enugu to visit the Biafran leader and be reassured. Colonel Ojukwu anticipated that forming an alliance with two of the three southern regions would persuade the West and force the federal government to negotiate. After a week, it became clear that this would not be the case, and Ojukwu gave the order for Biafran army to advance westward. The Biafrans crossed the Ofusu River Bridge, which marks the border with the western region, on August 16th. A brief brawl ensued with Nigerian troops, who subsequently withdrew. The Biafrans were jubilant as they inspected the Nigerian dead. It indicates that the Nigerian troops were from the Federal Guard, Gowon's personal bodyguard of 500 thieves who were ordinarily stationed in Lagos. It was assumed that if he had to use these, there must be nothing else available. On August 28th, Biafrans invaded Ore, a town 35 miles west of Lagos and 230 miles west of Enugu. Here, the Nigerian army, comprising mostly thief soldiers of the Federal Guard, got even their worst beating this time, and they abjectly retreated in disorder. To onlookers at the time, it appeared that only 10 weeks after the Arab-Israeli War, another military miracle had happened, with tiny Biafra overthrowing Nigeria's government. A sudden motorized push at that time along any one of three major roads available would have put Biafran forces deep into the Yoruba heartland and at the gates of Lagos. Such was the order Ojukwu gave to his forces. According to sources inside the American embassy, on August 20th, the Westerners were on the verge of adopting a policy of appeasing the Biafrans in order to save their skins. Gowon had ordered his private plane to be prepared for a flight back to Zaria in the north. British High Commissioner Sir David Hunt and the American ambassador Mr. James Matthews allegedly had a long and serious talk with Gowon in Dodan Barracks. It was after these talks that the nervous Gowon agreed to stay back and fight. The news of this intervention reached Ojukwu, causing outrage among British and American citizens in Biafra. The decision of Gowon to stay on saved his government from collapse and ensured the continuation of the war. Had he fled, however, there seems little doubt the West would have swung over and Nigeria would have developed into a confederation of three states. The Biafran suspicion had been that the carrot that tempted Gowon and his fellow minority men to stay in power was the pledge of British and American aid. Certainly, the aid followed hard and fast from that date. The fall of the Midwest had one other byproduct. It opened Nigeria's eye to the fact that they were fighting a war. The federal military government had underestimated Biafra from day one, but the Biafrans took advantage of this obvious mistake from the government and now had the war seemingly under control. This was quickly allowed to slip. In fact, the Biafran forces only got as far as Ore. Meanwhile, another unexpected turn of events had happened. Unknown to everyone, the commander of the Biafran forces in the Midwest had turned traitor. Victor Banjo was a Yoruba who served in the Nigerian army as a major before being imprisoned by General Ironsi for allegedly plotting against him. His prison was in the eastern region. From here, he was released by Colonel Ojukwu at the outbreak of the war and given a commission in the Biafran army. Why Ojukwu chooses Banjo to command the troops marching towards the west has not been fully explained. But the two soldiers were good friends, and Ojukwu had full confidence in his abilities. Secondly, being a Yoruba from western region, Banjo was familiar with the terrain and could use the language to convince the Yorubas in the occupied territories to support the war. With the rank of brigadier, Banjo commanded the S Brigade that marched into the Midwest and down to Ore. According to his own confession, after he was unmasked and arrested, he had concluded after August 9 that he would enter into talks with the leaders of the West, notably Chief Awolowo. He asked Ejo to act as a mediator between himself and Awolowo, but Ejo declined to take the risk. According to Banjo, he would later relay messages using the sideband radio of British Deputy High Commission in Benin. A British official communicated these messages in German to another official in the High Commission in Lagos. The message was passed on to Chief Awolowo. The plot, Banjo revealed, was typically Yoruba in its complexity. He was to destroy Biafra by withdrawing troops from the Midwest under various pretexts, arrest and assassinate Ojukwu, and declare the war over. He would subsequently return to his own region as a Nigerian hero. His past would now be forgiven and forgotten. He went on to say that the second part of the plan, which would be revealed later, was for him and Awolowo to rally the newly recruited Yoruba army to his cause, and talk will go on. This would allow him to take over the presidency of Nigeria and give Awolowo his long-desired premiership. It seems unlikely, though, that the Gowon government was informed of this postscript. Colonel Ifeajuna, who had also been released from prison, a Moscow-trained communist officer, Major Philip Alele, a Biafran Foreign Service official, Sam Abam, who did some of the negotiation between the two sides while out of Biafra, and several other junior officers and functionaries were all recruited into Banjo's plot. He was ready to execute this plot by mid-September. Despite being frustrated by the lack of action in the West, Colonel Ojukwu continued to believe Banjo and accept his claims of administrative issues, manpower shortages, lack of firearms and ammunition, and so on. True, the Nigerians had grown stronger in the 3 weeks that has passed. The Nigerians had formed 2 fresh brigades through a hasty 1-week recruitment campaign that brought into uniform diverse elements such as college students and prison inmates. This was the 2nd Division that was commanded by Colonel Moritala Mohammed. The division fought back from the western region. As late as the first week of September, the deployment of swift motorized column could have put the Biafrans in a commanding position in the western region. But on September 12, Banjo gave orders to withdraw from Benin City without firing a shot. He was not authorized to do so. Mohammed didn't arrive in Benin until September 21st. Banjo also issued orders to withdraw from Warri, Sapele, Auchi, Igweben, and other strategic locations. The Biafran subordinate officers were surprised and confused, but they did as they were told. Simultaneously, Biafran defenses south of Nsukka crumbled, and the Federal forces advanced many miles down the road to Enugu, 45 miles south of Nsukka. At this point, Banjo decided to attack Ojukwu directly. In the Midwest, he met with Ifeajuna and Alele to finalize the plans for the assassination, which was to take place on September 19, coinciding with Banjo's presence in Enugu, where he had been asked to explain what he was doing in Midwest. None of the 3 seemed to realize that time had run out. Surprisingly, they had told several other officers and civilians about the plans, without first checking to see if they would remain faithful to Ojukwu. In fact, most of them did, but some had already gone to meet him with the details of the plot. It took a lot of persuasion to convince him, but the facts were beginning to speak for themselves. Ifeajuna and Alele were each summoned to State House, where Ojukwu met them and ordered their arrest. Banjo was summoned as well, but he arrived with a strong escort of men who he wanted to bring into the premises. He was convinced that they could remain at the entrance until he returned. While he went in alone, but armed, he agreed. Colonel Ojukwu's police ADC, a clever young inspector, went out to the guard post with a bottle of gin while he was waiting in the anteroom. He offered them to come to his place nearby to enjoy some more after passing it around. They all agreed and marched off. Watchers inside State House observed their departure and then swung their automatic weapons at Banjo. He was disarmed before being led to see the Biafran leader. It was 6 hours to the time Colonel Ojukwu should have been assassinated, being close to midnight on September 18. The army became traumatized and demoralized. Even though the ordinary soldier remained loyal to Ojukwu, the entire officer corps was discredited. Although torn by his friendship with Banjo and a relation by marriage to Alele, Ojukwu had to set an example to avoid a repeat of this kind of plot. The 4 ranked leaders were tried by special tribunal, sentenced to death for high treason, and executed by firing squad on September 22, 1967. The exact degree of complicity of some of the British officials in Nigeria remained a matter of speculation in Biafra. In his confession, though, Banjo implicated the British Deputy High Commissioner in Benin and the High Commission in Lagos as having been his liaison men with Awolowo and Gowon. Correspondents in Lagos later remarked they had noticed a sudden buoyancy among British officials in the middle of September, a confident assurance that it will all be over in a few days. This was in stark contrast to the near panic of 28 August and a prophecy hardly merited by the military situation. But after the attempted coup against Ojukwu, things actually changed. The damage in Biafra was enormous. We will look at what happened from now on in our subsequent video. Want to watch more videos like this? Subscribe to Bistory Media and press the bell icon next to it. We'll bring you more videos on the forgotten history of Nigeria and important events around the African continent, the power, and things the world should know about Africa. Thanks for watching, and until my next video, please stay tuned and cheers.